Welcome to Perimenopause Hell. This presentation is about progesterone. Progesterone is often used for controlling heavy bleeding during perimenopause. Progesterone only stops the bleeding whilst you are taking it. When you stop taking it, you will have what is called a withdrawal bleed. It's not really a proper period that your body has caused. It's what happens in response to stopping taking the progesterone. Progesterone reproduces the second half of your cycle. So when you ovulate, your body starts to make progesterone. And when it stops around day 26, 48 hours later, you have your period. So whilst you're taking progesterone, your body is fooled into thinking it's in the second half of the cycle before you start bleeding. And when you stop taking it, you have a period. So this is really ideal for preventing bleeding. So if you're in the first half of peri and you're getting a period every 2 weeks, or you're spotting all the time, then that's another use for progesterone, not just for controlling heavy bleeding, but for scheduling your period so that you only have one every 4 weeks as usual. So once again, this will only stop you bleeding whilst you're taking it. You don't take it whilst you're bleeding. The types of progesterone you'll probably be familiar with are the mini pill, which is progesterone only. There's no estrogen in it at all. And the progesterone only pill, which is really the same thing. It's just another name for it. Also the Mirena, which is the intrauterine device or coil that releases progesterone. And the Depo-Provera injections. I'm not going to discuss the creams. There's a separate video on creams. I don't recommend them at all, and they certainly aren't usually strong enough for controlling heavy bleeding if you're going to get the over-the-counter ones from a pharmacy. Dose counts. Once again, the same as the tranexamic acid episode, if the progesterone is not strong enough, then it will not control your bleeding. And in perimenopause, this is really important. Low doses of progesterone, such as are regularly used in a contraceptive pill, probably are not going to be strong enough to control your flooding. This is a page from the British National Formulary hosted by NICE at the moment, which shows you the various doses which are used when you are taking a type of progesterone called norethindrone. This is also referred to as norethisterone. It's the same thing, so don't worry. This gives the dose for dysfunctional uterine bleeding to arrest bleeding, which means in order to stop it once you're having a period, the dose is higher than to prevent bleeding. So if you're in a full-scale flood, you're going to need 5 milligrams 3 times a day for 10 days is what is recommended, okay? So that's 15 milligrams daily. The dose for contraception in a mini pill is 0.35 milligrams, and this will not usually work to control bleeding. So if your doctor's prescribed that, naughty doctor, they need to look at their reference materials because it's not going to work, basically. So once you have got the bleeding under control, that's when you can drop the dose a bit. So what it says here is the dose for dysfunctional uterine bleeding or menorrhagia to prevent bleeding is 5 milligrams twice a day. And it says from day 19 to 26 of the cycle. But your doctor might change which days they give it to you. And some doctors will recommend that from day 5 to 21, for example. So that can be changed. Going on to the second most popular Medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is more easily known as Provera. That's a damn sight easier to say, isn't it? Or they sometimes call it MPA, actually, because that's easy to say too. These two types of progesterone are synthetic progesterones, and they have the best and strongest action on the uterine lining. That's why these two are usually prescribed. But of the two, Provera has slightly worse side effects, I would say. The dose of this is, as it says here, out of BNF. For dysfunctional uterine bleeding, 2.5 to 10 milligrams daily for 5 to 10 days. Repeated for 2 cycles, begin treatment on day 16 to 21. As I've said before, this can change, and sometimes a doctor will approve you to take it continuously so you can avoid having a period at all. There's nothing particularly wrong with that, providing you don't continue spotting. If you are having any bleeding while you're taking these, the dose is not strong enough and you need to speak to your doctor. I'm not going to get into great detail about the Mirena in this particular video. It probably deserves a video of its own. This is the Mirena IUD, and it seems to be a real kind of reflex reaction, knee-jerk reaction for doctors to prescribe this, especially at gynecologists. You'll go in for a hysteroscopy and they'll say, are you having a Mirena as well? Well, I would only ever recommend you have one of these if you've already taken oral progesterone before and you know what the side effects are. If you've taken norethindrone or progesterone, Provera, and you're okay with it, then by all means, a Mirena might be a good choice for you. I would have a look and Google, the sort of things that women have experienced that are really bad through Mirena. There have been class actions about Mirena. But many women are very happy. We've had plenty of admins and moderators in the group who've had Mirenas and they're really happy with it. So it's people like me. I get really depressed when I take oral progesterones. I would never have a Mirena because the thought of not being able to remove it or find the strings and get it out of me would really freak me out, because I find that progesterone really affects my mood and makes me seriously depressed. The interesting thing about Mirena is that if you then want to go on to HRT, you're having low estrogen symptoms as well as needing to control bleeding, you can add an estrogen patch or gel, and then that is classed as HRT. Mirena contains a type of synthetic progesterone called levonorgestrel. Many gynecologists will say to you that the side effects aren't as bad as oral progesterone because it's a lower dose and it goes straight into the uterus. But, from what I've read, that isn't necessarily true. And it's just as bad as taking the oral one, apart from sometimes you need to make an appointment to get it removed because you can't manage to find the strings yourself. That would not be a good situation to be in if it was making you highly depressed, having to wait 2 or 3 weeks. Anyhow, sometimes Mirena is just not strong enough for peri-bleeding, and there are women in the group who have just expelled it with the clots that they have when they're having heavy bleeding. So it doesn't always work as well as gynecologists think it will. There is bioidentical progesterone available on prescription now. In Australia and America, it's branded as Prometrium. In the UK, we have Utrogestan, which is much the same thing. It's a bioidentical micronized progesterone. However, it isn't indicated for menorrhagia, so it's not listed as being suitable for controlling heavy bleeding. There are, however, pages online that give the suggested doses for this. It's quite a high dose. And really, if you're sensitive to progesterone, there is a slight chance that it won't make you quite as depressed. But, maybe not. I know women who found it just as bad, to be honest. It can be used vaginally simply by inserting the pills. And usually the dose that you would take orally, if used vaginally, you wouldn't have to use another dose for the next 3 days. Allegedly, this causes fewer side effects because, much like the Mirena, it's nearer to where it needs to take effect. My gynecologist in the UK will not prescribe this to me for heavy bleeding. She will only prescribe it as part of HRT. So you may have a fight on your hands trying to get this, and you may have to go private if you're in the UK. Progesterone is the PMS and pregnancy hormone. So although it's been touted as the greatest thing since sliced bread, for some of us it has very, very bad emotional problems. So it can cause depression, it can cause anger, it can cause irritability and anxiety. Any sort of PMS symptom that you might have, it can cause it to get very, very severe. So if you're like me, tranexamic acid is a very good alternative. If you want to take estrogen and you still have a uterus, you must take some kind of progesterone as part of HRT to protect you from cancer of the uterus. This sometimes is an obstacle for women like me who have severe adverse reactions to it, and that is really the kind of circumstance when you would perhaps rather take the Prometrium, the bioidentical progesterone, rather than the synthetic, which is said to be worse in terms of side effects. Anyhow, that's the end of this presentation. If you found it interesting and informative, then do like and subscribe and all of that YouTube jazz. Thank you for watching.